Zara Williams stared at the white businessman occupying her seat, her 10-year-old hands clutching the first-class ticket her father had purchased. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "This aircraft is returning to the gate. Security will be boarding shortly." The man smirked victoriously. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing up against injustice. Now let's see how this showdown began and what happens when prejudice meets unwavering courage. Marcus Williams had always taught his daughter to stand tall even when the world tried to push her down. As the founder and CEO of Williams Innovations, a revolutionary tech company valued at over $15 billion, he knew firsthand how society would try to diminish her worth simply because of her skin color. His journey from the struggling neighborhoods of Atlanta to the penthouses of Manhattan had taught him valuable lessons about perseverance, dignity, and self-respect, lessons he made sure to pass on to his only daughter, Zara. At 10 years old, Zara Williams was already showing signs of the same brilliant mind that had made her father successful. With an IQ of 145 and a passion for mathematics that had her solving calculus problems while her classmates struggled with basic multiplication, she was often described by her teachers as a once-in-a-generation talent. Despite her exceptional abilities, Zara remained humble and kind, traits her father valued above all others. On this particular Tuesday morning in April, Zara stood in the massive walk-in closet of their Manhattan penthouse, carefully selecting her outfit for her very first solo trip with her caretaker, Miss Elaine Jackson. Miss Elaine Jackson. Jackson, a dignified black woman of 55 years, had been with the Williams family since before Zara was born. Once a respected mathematics professor herself, she had left academia to help raise Zara after the tragic death of Zara's mother during childbirth. Their bond was unbreakable, built on shared grief, mutual respect, and a love of numbers. The trip to San Francisco was a significant milestone for both Zara and Marcus. She had qualified for the National Youth Mathematics Challenge, the most prestigious competition for young mathematicians in the country. Marcus had initially planned to accompany her, but an emergency acquisition meeting had made that impossible. Instead, he had arranged for Miss Jackson to travel with Zara, booking them both first-class tickets on the direct flight from JFK to San Francisco International. This would be Zara's first experience flying first class without her father. "Remember, sweetheart," Marcus said, as he helped Zara pack her special lucky pencil case, "that ticket has your name on it. Your seat is your right. Don't let anyone tell you differently." He paused, his hands gently resting on his daughter's shoulders. "The world will try to tell you that you don't belong in certain spaces because of how you look. Never believe them. You belong anywhere your mind and heart take you." Zara nodded, solemnly understanding the weight of her father's words, even at her young age. She had already experienced subtle forms of discrimination, the kind that came in the form of surprised expressions when she demonstrated her knowledge, or the way some of her father's business associates would speak to her as if she were a toddler rather than the intellectually gifted child she was. The morning of the flight, Marcus had his driver take Zara and Miss Jackson to the airport 3 hours early, ensuring they would have plenty of time to navigate security. Even with his wealth and status, Marcus knew that traveling while black often meant additional scrutiny, unexpected delays, and subtle forms of harassment. His preparations proved prescient when a TSA agent questioned the authenticity of Zara's passport despite its obvious legitimacy. "Are you sure this is your passport, young lady?" the agent asked, his tone implying suspicion rather than routine verification. Miss Jackson intervened smoothly, her voice calm but authoritative. "Yes, that is her passport. Is there a specific concern you'd like to address?" The agent looked at Miss Jackson, then back at Zara, before finally waving them through without further comment. As they approached the first-class lounge, another microaggression awaited them. The attendant at the entrance addressed all her questions to Miss Jackson, despite Zara being clearly listed as the primary traveler on their documentation. "And how long will you and your charge be staying in our lounge today?" she asked Miss Jackson, not even glancing at Zara. "You should direct your questions to Miss Williams," Miss Jackson replied firmly. She is the primary ticket holder. The attendant's smile faltered for a moment before she turned to Zara with a slightly less genuine expression. "And how long will you be staying with us today, Miss Williams?" Zara, accustomed to such interactions, answered with the poise her father had instilled in her. "Until our flight boards in approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. Thank you for your assistance." Once inside the lounge, Zara and Miss Jackson found a quiet corner where Zara could review some competition problems. Despite the earlier encounters, Zara's excitement about the trip remained undiminished. This competition represented an opportunity to prove herself on a national stage, to show that her abilities transcended any preconceptions about her age or race. When the boarding announcement finally came, Zara gathered her special backpack filled with math books and the tablet her father had programmed with a direct line to his personal phone. They approached the gate with their boarding passes ready, and the gate agent smiled genuinely at Zara. "Looks like you're one of our first-class passengers today, Miss Williams. You and your companion can board right now." The acknowledgement, so simple yet so often denied, lifted Zara's spirits as they walked down the jet bridge. The first-class cabin was nearly empty when they boarded, with only a few business people already settled in their seats. Zara consulted her boarding pass and made her way to seat 3 Amperes. A window seat her father had specifically requested, so she could watch the takeoff and landing experiences she found both thrilling and mathematically fascinating. But as she approached row 3, Zara stopped abruptly. A white man in an expensive suit, approximately in his 50s, was comfortably settled in her assigned seat, his laptop open on the tray table, as if he had been there for hours. Miss Jackson noticed Zara's hesitation and looked over her shoulder at the boarding pass, confirming what Zara already knew. Seat 3 Amperes was unquestionably hers. Zara took a deep breath, remembering her father's words. Her seat was her right. With the confidence that came from knowing she was correct, Zara stepped forward, ready to claim what was rightfully hers, unaware that this simple act would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately ground the entire aircraft. The man in seat 3 Amperes didn't look up as Zara approached, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen as his fingers tapped methodically on the keyboard. He exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to taking up space without question, someone who had never had his right to be somewhere challenged. Zara cleared her throat politely, just as her father had taught her. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice clear and steady despite her youth. "I believe you're in my seat." Richard Whitman, as his luggage tag identified him, glanced up briefly before returning his attention to his screen. "No, I'm not," he replied dismissively, not even bothering to make eye contact with the child addressing him. His fingers never stopped typing his dismissal, complete in its casualness. Zara stood her ground, gripping her boarding pass a little tighter. "This is seat 3 Amperes, she said, "and that's what's assigned on my ticket." This time, Richard looked up long enough to assess the young black girl standing in the aisle. His eyes flickered briefly to Miss Jackson, who stood protectively behind Zara before settling back on his screen. "Listen, kid," he said, with exaggerated patience. "There must be some mistake. This is my seat. Why don't you double-check your ticket?" The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. "Miss—" Jackson stepped forward, then placing a gentle hand on Zara's shoulder. "Perhaps we should verify the tickets," she suggested, keeping her tone neutral, despite the anger beginning to simmer beneath her calm exterior. At Miss Jackson's intervention, Richard's demeanor changed subtly. He straightened in his seat and finally closed his laptop, addressing himself entirely to Miss Jackson as if Zara had suddenly become invisible. "Ma'am," he said, his voice taking on a tone of forced politeness, "I'm sure your charge has simply misunderstood her ticket. First class can be confusing for those not used to it. Perhaps you're in another section." The implication that neither Zara nor Miss Jackson belonged in first class hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Miss Jackson's expression remained impassive, years of dealing with such microaggressions having taught her to control her reactions. "The ticket clearly states seat 3 Amperes, she said, "and this is indeed the first-class section." "Would you mind showing your ticket, sir?" Zara asked, her young voice remarkably composed. "So we can resolve this misunderstanding." Richard's expression hardened slightly. "I don't need to show my ticket to prove I'm in the right seat," he replied, his tone becoming more clipped. "I fly this route every week." The exchange was beginning to attract attention from other passengers in the first-class cabin. A middle-aged white couple in row 2 exchanged glances, while a businessman across the aisle pretended to be absorbed in his newspaper, though his eyes occasionally darted toward the developing situation. At that moment, a flight attendant approached her practice smile firmly in place. Her name tag read Brianna Cooper, and she surveyed the situation with the quick assessment of someone used to resolving passenger disputes. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her gaze moving between Richard, still seated, and Zara and Miss Jackson standing in the aisle. Before either Zara or Miss Jackson could respond, Richard spoke up. "No problem at all," he said smoothly. "These folks seem to be confused about their seating. Perhaps you could help them find where they're supposed to be." Again, the implication that they didn't belong was clear, and Brianna's response showed that she had absorbed it without question. "Let me see your boarding passes," she said to Zara and Miss Jackson, not even considering that Richard might be the one in the wrong seat. Zara handed over her boarding pass, her expression betraying nothing of the frustration she felt at being automatically assumed to be the one making a mistake. Brianna examined the ticket and frowned slightly. "This does say seat 3 amperes, she confirmed, glancing at Richard with uncertainty. "Sir, could I see your boarding pass as well?" Richard sighed heavily, making a show of being inconvenienced. "I've been sitting here since priority boarding," he said. "My ticket is already put away in my briefcase in the overhead compartment." He gestured vaguely upward, making no move to actually retrieve the item in question. Brianna hesitated, clearly reluctant to challenge an adult white male passenger who projected such confidence. "Well," she said, turning back to Zara and Miss Jackson, "there are several other window seats available in first class. Perhaps you would be willing to take one of those instead. It would be the simplest solution." Zara felt a flash of indignation. The simplest solution was being presented as her giving up her assigned seat rather than the man being asked to move to his proper place. It was exactly the sort of situation her father had prepared her for, where the path of least resistance was always assumed to be the marginalized person yielding their rights. "This is my assigned seat," Zara said firmly. "I should not have to take a different seat because someone else is in mine." The clarity of her statement coming from such a young voice seemed to take Brianna aback. Other passengers were now openly watching the interaction, the pretense of disinterest abandoned. Richard's expression darkened annoyance, crossing his features at being challenged by a child, particularly a black child. "Listen," he said, addressing Brianna rather than Zara, "I'm in the middle of important business preparations. I specifically chose this seat for the privacy it offers. Surely there's a way to resolve this without disrupting my work." The implied message was clear. His comfort and convenience outweighed Zara's right to her assigned seat. Brianna looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between enforcing airline policy and appeasing a demanding passenger. "Perhaps if I could just see both tickets," she suggested again, more firmly this time. Richard exhaled dramatically and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Fine," he said, standing up to reach for the overhead compartment, "though I don't see why I need to prove anything." As he retrieved his briefcase, another passenger a few rows back spoke up. "The child was right about it being her seat," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly in the cabin. "I saw her boarding pass clearly displayed when she was checking at the gate." This new voice belonged to Dr. Maya Johnson, a distinguished-looking black woman in her 60s, whose observant eyes had been following the interaction from the beginning. Her intervention seemed to shift the dynamic in the cabin, creating a visible ripple of discomfort among those who had been silently watching. Richard fumbled with his briefcase, his movements becoming less smooth as he felt the weight of observation from the other passengers. When he finally produced his boarding pass, he handed it to Brianna with obvious reluctance. Brianna examined both tickets side by side, her professional mask slipping slightly as she confirmed what was now obvious to everyone watching. "Sir," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "your assigned seat is actually 7C, not 3 amperes." Richard's face flushed, but rather than acknowledging his error, he doubled down. "There must be some mistake in the system," he insisted. "I always get a window seat." "The system doesn't make these kinds of mistakes, sir," Brianna replied, her confidence returning now that she had concrete evidence. "I'll need to ask you to move to your assigned seat so Miss Williams can take hers." Richard made no immediate move to gather his belongings. Instead, he looked directly at Zara for the first time, his expression a mixture of irritation and something darker, more resentful. "Typical," he muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Some people are just given everything these days, aren't they?" The coded racism of the comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up to challenge it. Zara stood perfectly still, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Your seat is your right. Don't let anyone tell you differently." The confrontation had begun, and it was clear that Richard Whitman had no intention of yielding gracefully. What should have been a simple correction was about to escalate into something much more significant, a test of wills with implications far beyond a disputed airplane seat. Recognizing that the situation was rapidly deteriorating, Zara made a decision. Without a word, she pulled her tablet from her backpack and typed a quick message to her father. The communication was brief but clear, explaining the situation and identifying Richard by name. Years of preparation for exactly this type of scenario were now proving their value. Miss Jackson watched Zara with quiet pride, knowing that Marcus had equipped his daughter with both the confidence to stand up for herself and the tools to seek appropriate backup when needed. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable as Richard continued to make no move to collect his belongings. Instead, he addressed Brianna once more, his voice taking on the practiced tone of someone accustomed to having his complaints addressed promptly. "I'd like to speak with your superior," he said. "This situation is being handled very poorly." Dr. Maya Johnson, the older black professor who had spoken up earlier, observed the scene with growing concern. Having experienced decades of similar treatment herself, she recognized the familiar pattern unfolding before her. A white man was refusing to acknowledge his wrongdoing, attempting to reframe the narrative, and seeking to escalate to someone who might be more sympathetic to his position. As a professor of sociology specializing in race relations at Columbia University, Dr. Johnson had written extensively about these exact dynamics. Now she was watching them play out in real time. Brianna's professional smile had become strained. "Sir, the tickets clearly indicate that seat 3 amperes belongs to Miss Williams. There are several other excellent seats available in first class, including your assigned seat 7C. I need to ask you to move so we can complete the boarding process." Richard made no move to comply. "I've been sitting here for 20 minutes already. I've set up my workspace. Moving now would be extremely inconvenient." His emphasis on his own convenience, with complete disregard for the young girl whose seat he had taken, spoke volumes about his sense of entitlement. Perhaps he continued looking at Zara and Miss Jackson. Since there are other available seats, these ladies would be willing to be reasonable and take one of those instead. "I'm sure the airline could offer some compensation for their flexibility." Brianna glanced at Zara, clearly hoping she might acquiesce to avoid further conflict. But Zara stood firm, her expression resolute beyond her years. "This is my assigned seat," she repeated calmly. "I selected it specifically for the view during takeoff. My father taught me that I should never give up what is rightfully mine, simply to make things easier for someone else." A murmur ran through the cabin. At her words, a mixture of admiration and discomfort. Some passengers nodded in approval, while others shifted nervously, the confrontation making them uneasy. "Miss Passengers," Jackson placed a protective hand on Zara's shoulder. "My charge has made her position clear," she said to Brianna. "We would like to resolve this according to the airline's policies regarding assigned seating." The reference to policy seemed to strengthen Brianna's resolve. "Sir," she said more firmly to Richard, "I must insist that you move to your assigned seat. It's airline policy that passengers sit in their designated seats for safety and administrative purposes." Richard's face had grown increasingly flushed, his frustration evident in the tightening of his jaw and the way his fingers gripped the armrest. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm a platinum member with over 200,000 miles this year alone. Does that count for nothing?" As the confrontation continued, Other passengers who had been waiting to board were beginning to back up in the jet bridge, creating a growing problem for the flight schedule. Sensing the escalating tension, another flight attendant appeared beside Brianna. This was Michael Torres, the head flight attendant, a veteran with 15 years of experience handling difficult situations. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a note of authority that had been missing from the interaction so far. Brianna quickly explained the situation, showing Michael both boarding passes. Michael nodded, taking in the information efficiently. "Sir," he said to Richard, "I can see that there's been a misunderstanding. Your assigned seat is 7C, an aisle seat in row 7. I need to ask you to gather your belongings and move to that seat so Miss Williams can take her assigned seat and we can continue with the boarding process." Richard's expression darkened further. "I've explained to your colleague that moving at this point would be extremely inconvenient. I don't understand why this is such an issue when there are other available seats." Michael remained unflappable. "It's not a matter of convenience, sir. It's a matter of assigned seating. Each passenger is entitled to their specific seat as indicated on their boarding pass. Miss Williams is entitled to seat 3 amperes, which is clearly marked on her ticket." Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent those nearby from hearing. "Look," he said between us, "I need this specific seat. I get terrible anxiety in aisle seats during flight. Surely we can come to some arrangement here." The implication that he and Michael should form an alliance against Zara and Miss Jackson was clear an assumption of solidarity, based on nothing more than gender. If Richard had hoped for male support, he was disappointed. "I understand anxiety concerns," Michael replied evenly, "but those should be addressed with the airline before boarding, so appropriate accommodations can be made. At this point, the only solution is for you to move to your assigned seat." As the standoff continued, more passengers were watching openly now. Someone in the row behind had taken out their phone and was discreetly recording the interaction. The mood in the cabin had shifted, with clear lines being drawn between those who supported Zara's right to her seat and those who seemed to sympathize with Richard's reluctance to move. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, Richard finally began to gather his belongings, making a show of how inconvenient and disruptive the process was. As he stood, he looked directly at Zara once more. "I suppose certain people are being given preferential treatment these days," he said loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "Merit and loyalty don't seem to count for much anymore." The racial undertone of his comment was unmistakable. Dr. Johnson, who had been quietly observing, spoke up again. "Young lady," she said to Zara, "you handled that with remarkable poise. Your father must be very proud of you." The mention of Zara's father seemed to trigger something in Richard. He paused in collecting his laptop, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked more closely at Zara. "Williams," he repeated, as if suddenly connecting dots in his mind. "Not related to Marcus Williams, of Williams Innovations. Are you?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "He's my father," she said simply. Richard's expression changed, a mixture of recognition and something that looked almost like calculation crossing his features. Without another word, he finished gathering his belongings and moved toward row 7, but not before casting one last look at Zara that contained none of the contrition one might expect after such an interaction. It was a look that suggested this encounter was far from over. Do you think Richard knew exactly whose seat he was taking all along? Comment number 1. If you believe he targeted Zara deliberately, or number 2, if you think it was just an entitled mistake. Give this video a like if you admire Zara's composure in this tense situation. Hit subscribe to follow this story to its shocking conclusion. What do you think will happen now that Richard knows exactly who Zara is? Will he back down or escalate the situation even further? Let's continue with this incredible story of courage in the face of discrimination. The first-class cabin had become a silent battlefield of sideways glances and whispered comments. As Zara finally settled into her rightful seat by the window with Miss Jackson taking the adjacent seat, the other passengers divided themselves into silent factions. Most tried to appear uninvolved, busying themselves with magazines or phones, but their occasional glances betrayed their interest in the unfolding drama. In row 2, an older white couple leaned toward each other, exchanging hushed comments behind cupped hands. The woman occasionally cast disapproving looks in Richard's direction, while her husband seemed more concerned with the delay to their schedule than with the principles at stake. Across the aisle, a young Asian American woman in a crisp business suit had witnessed the entire exchange and was now typing rapidly on her phone, her expression a mixture of anger and determination. In seat 4D, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit similar to Richard's maintained a carefully neutral expression, though he had nodded almost imperceptibly when Richard had made his comment about preferential treatment. The silent taking of sides was as clear as if people had physically moved to opposite ends of the cabin. What was less obvious to most passengers, but immediately apparent to Dr. Maya Johnson, was how this division fell largely along racial lines. The few people of color in the first-class cabin had uniformly registered support for Zara through small gestures, nods, or encouraging smiles. The white passengers were more divided, some clearly sympathetic to Zara, others seemingly annoyed by the disruption or subtly aligned with Richard's position. Dr. Johnson had spent her academic career documenting exactly these kinds of racial dynamics in public spaces. From her seat in 5C, she could observe both Zara and Richard, without being too obvious about her interest. Richard had settled into his assigned seat in 7C, with visible displeasure, making a show of how the aisle seat cramped his style, sighing loudly as he attempted to set up his laptop in the more confined space. He had already pressed his call button twice, demanding first a different blanket and then complaining about the temperature of the water he was served. His behavior was a textbook example of what Dr. Johnson had termed entitlement backlash in her published works, the petty retaliation of the privileged when forced to yield even the smallest advantage. Meanwhile, social media was already beginning to light up with updates about the incident. The young businesswoman who had been typing on her phone had posted a brief account of what she had witnessed to her Twitter account, where her position as a junior executive at a tech company gave her a substantial following. The passenger who had been recording had uploaded a short clip to TikTok, being careful to avoid showing Zara's face directly out of consideration for her age, but capturing Richard's dismissive tone and racially coded language. As boarding continued, the ripples of the confrontation spread beyond the first-class cabin. Passengers entering the plane could sense the tension, their curious glances taking in the unusually quiet atmosphere in the premium section. Flight attendants moved with heightened efficiency, their professional smiles a bit more forced than usual as they tried to get the boarding process back on schedule. In the cockpit, Captain Lisa Morales was receiving updates about the situation from Michael Torres. A veteran pilot with 22 years of experience, Captain Morales had seen her share of passenger disputes, but the involvement of a child, particularly the child of someone as prominent as Marcus Williams, added an extra layer of complexity. "How's the situation now?" she asked Michael, her eyes still moving methodically over her pre-flight checklist. "Contained for the moment," Michael replied. "The passenger has moved to his assigned seat, but he's being difficult, making demands clearly trying to assert some control after being made to move." Captain Morales nodded, recognizing the behavior pattern. "And the child? How is she handling it?" "Remarkably well," Michael said, genuine admiration in his voice. "She's poised, articulate, completely composed. Frankly, she's behaving with more maturity than most adults would in the same situation." "Keep an eye on it," Captain Morales instructed. "If there's any further escalation, I want to know immediately. We can't have a situation brewing once we're in the air." Back in the cabin, Zara was doing her best to focus on the mathematics textbook she had brought for the flight, but she was acutely aware of being the center of attention. Every time she looked up, she caught someone quickly averting their gaze. The weight of all those eyes made it difficult to concentrate on the advanced calculus problems that normally absorbed her completely. "Miss," Jackson sensed her discomfort and leaned over to speak quietly. "You did exactly the right thing," she assured Zara. "Your father would be very proud of how you handled that." Zara nodded, but her usual confidence had been shaken. "Everyone is staring," she whispered back. "And that man is still so angry." "Miss," Jackson's expression hardened slightly as she glanced toward row 7, where Richard was visibly fuming, his stiff posture and tight expression broadcasting his displeasure to everyone around him. "That's his problem, not yours," Miss Jackson said firmly. "You claimed what was rightfully yours. His anger comes from entitlement, from believing he deserved special treatment simply because of who he is." Dr. Johnson, who had been observing silently, chose this moment to lean forward from her seat, directly behind Zara. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I couldn't help overhearing. I just wanted to say that I'm Dr. Maya Johnson from Columbia University, and I thought your handling of that situation was exemplary." Zara turned, recognizing the woman who had spoken up earlier. "Thank you," she said politely. "My father always says that standing your ground doesn't mean losing your composure." "Doctor," Johnson smiled warmly, "your father sounds like a wise man. Would that be Marcus Williams of Williams Innovations?" Zara nodded, not surprised that her father's name was recognized. Marcus Williams was not only a billionaire entrepreneur, but also a prominent philanthropist and advocate for increasing diversity in STEM fields. His face regularly appeared in business magazines and technology forums. "Doctor says," Johnson's smile widened. "I've had the pleasure of meeting him several times through university fundraising events. His contributions to our scholarship program for underprivileged students with aptitude in mathematics have been transformative." This connection seemed to ease some of Zara's tension, providing a reminder of the broader purpose behind her trip. She was heading to San Francisco, not just as Marcus Williams's daughter, but as a mathematician in her own right, ready to compete at the highest level for her age group. As they conversed quietly, Richard was becoming increasingly agitated in his seat. His attempts to work on his laptop were punctuated by frequent glares toward Zara's seat. When a flight attendant passed by, he flagged her down again. "Is there any chance of an upgrade to business class?" he asked, though his tone made it more of a demand than a question. "I'm finding this seat extremely uncomfortable." The flight attendant, not Brianna or Michael this time, but a younger woman named Zara, explained apologetically that business class was fully booked. Richard's response was immediate and disproportionate. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice rising enough to carry through the cabin. "I'm a platinum executive member. I spend thousands of dollars with this airline every month. And you're telling me I have to remain uncomfortable for a 6-hour flight because some child insisted on having my seat?" Zara tried to correct him gently. "Sir, it wasn't your seat. It was assigned to the young passenger as indicated on her boarding pass." "Don't split hairs with me," Richard snapped. "I've been flying this route every 2 weeks for the past year. The airline knows my preferences. This is clearly an error in your system, and now I'm being penalized for it." His raised voice had drawn the attention of everyone in the first-class cabin once more. Michael Torres appeared almost instantly, his experienced ear tuned to detect escalating situations. "Sir," he said calmly to Richard, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We're still in the boarding process, and you're disrupting other passengers." Richard turned his frustration on Michael. "I want to speak to the captain," he demanded. "This situation has been mishandled from the beginning, and I intend to file a formal complaint with airline management." Michael's expression remained neutral, but his tone firmed slightly. "The captain is currently completing pre-flight procedures and cannot be disturbed. If you have concerns about your seating assignment, we can address those after takeoff, or you can speak with a customer service representative at the gate." Richard's face had grown increasingly flushed. "Are you refusing my request to speak to the captain?" Michael held his ground. "I'm explaining that the captain is unavailable during critical pre-flight operations as per airline safety protocols." The standoff between them was interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Attention all passengers and crew. This is Captain Morales speaking. I've been informed of a situation in the first-class cabin that is delaying our boarding process. I want to inform everyone that we will not be closing the doors for departure until all seating issues are fully resolved and all passengers are properly seated according to their assigned seats. Thank you for your patience." The message was clear, and the ripple of reaction through the cabin was immediate. Several passengers in coach who had been waiting in the aisle during the extended boarding process groaned audibly. The pressure of collective impatience was now added to the already tense atmosphere in first class. Richard seemed momentarily taken aback by the public acknowledgement of the delay he was causing. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Michael leaned closer and spoke in a lower voice. "Sir, we have over 200 passengers on this flight, many with connecting flights at our destination. The captain has the authority to remove disruptive passengers if necessary. I strongly suggest you settle into your assigned seat so we can proceed with on-time departure." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Richard looked as though he might argue further, but a quick glance around the cabin showed him that public opinion had shifted decisively against him. With a final glare toward Zara's seat, he subsided into sullen compliance, yanking his seatbelt across his lap with unnecessary force. Michael nodded once satisfied, and moved back toward the front of the cabin. As he passed Zara's row, he gave her a subtle, encouraging nod that few would have noticed, but that meant everything to the young girl still feeling the weight of unwanted attention. At the front of the plane, Brianna was speaking quietly into the cabin phone, updating Captain Morales on the situation. After a brief conversation, she replaced the handset and addressed the waiting passengers in the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in boarding. We'll be resuming the process now. Please continue to your assigned seats as quickly as possible so we can prepare for departure." As boarding resumed, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained charged with unspoken tension. The battle for Zara's seat had been won, but it was becoming increasingly clear that Richard Whitman was not a man accustomed to losing, nor one who accepted defeat gracefully. The confrontation had paused, but everyone present could sense that it was far from over. While tension simmered in the first-class cabin of Flight 623, the digital world was already amplifying the confrontation beyond the confines of the aircraft. Jasmine Chen, the young tech executive who had been typing furiously on her phone, had over 85,000 followers on Twitter due to her insightful commentary on technology trends and workplace diversity issues. Her thread about the incident, carefully worded to avoid identifying Zara directly while clearly outlining Richard's behavior, was gaining traction rapidly. Witnessing textbook entitlement on my flight, her first tweet read, "White male passenger took a seat assigned to a young black passenger, refused to move, then made racially coded comments when finally forced to follow the rules that apply to everyone else. Number everyday racism. Number first class while black." Within minutes, the thread had been shared over 500 times, with comments flooding in from people sharing similar experiences or expressing outrage. The short video clip posted on TikTok by another passenger was spreading even faster, having been viewed over 20,000 times in just 15 minutes. The clip had been edited to blur out identifying features of the passengers involved, but had captured Richard's tone and his comment about certain people receiving preferential treatment. The poster had added text overlay that read, entitled "Passenger Steals Seat from a Kid Gets Mad When Asked to Follow Rules. Wait for the racist comment at the end." On the other side of the country, in his Manhattan office, overlooking Central Park, Marcus Williams was watching these developments with growing concern. Zara's message had reached him instantly on his private tablet, triggering an alert that interrupted his acquisition meeting. The message was brief but clear. "Dad, a man named Richard Whitman took my seat and refused to move." Flight attendants had to intervene. He made comments about certain people getting preferential treatment. "He seemed to recognize your name. Miss Jackson is with me. I'm okay, but thought you should know." Marcus had immediately excused himself from the meeting and instructed his executive assistant to find out everything possible about Richard Whitman while he searched social media for any mentions of the incident. What he found was troubling. The situation was gaining visibility rapidly, with new posts appearing every few seconds across multiple platforms. Marcus's protective instincts surged, but he tempered them with the careful calculation that had made him successful in business. He needed more information before deciding how to respond. With a few taps on his tablet, he connected to his head of security, a former FBI agent named David Carter. "David," he said without preamble, "Zara is experiencing an incident on her flight to San Francisco." a man named Richard Whitman created a scene about her assigned seat and made racially charged comments. I need everything we can find on him, particularly any business connections or previous incidents of this nature." "On it," David replied. "I'll have preliminary information to you within 15 minutes. Next, Marcus contacted his corporate legal team. "I need someone monitoring all social media related to an incident on Flight 623 from JFK to SFO," he instructed. "Zara is involved. No direct engagement from our side yet, but I want to be prepared if this escalates further." With those measures in place, Marcus turned his attention to the airline. As a frequent flyer with elite status and significant business connections, he had direct access to executive customer service. Within moments, he was speaking with Janet Rodriguez, a senior vice president of customer experience. "Miss Rodriguez," Marcus began, his tone professionally cordial, but with an unmistakable edge of concern. "My 10-year-old daughter is currently on Flight 623 from JFK to San Francisco. She has experienced racial discrimination from another passenger who refused to vacate her assigned seat and made inappropriate comments when finally compelled to move. I want to know how the airline is addressing this situation." Janet Rodriguez's response was immediate and carefully measured. "Mr. Williams, I'm very sorry to hear about this incident. I can assure you that we take such matters extremely seriously. Let me get the latest update from our operations team." There was a brief pause as she consulted another screen. "I see that the captain has been made aware of the situation, and our cabin crew has resolved the immediate seating issue. The flight is currently in final boarding, slightly delayed but expected to depart within the next 15 minutes. Marcus pressed for more specifics. "And the passenger who created this situation, what actions are being taken regarding his behavior?" "Our policy is to first attempt to resolve conflicts without escalation," Janet explained. "The cabin crew is monitoring the situation closely. If there are any further incidents, they have protocols in place that can include reseating the disruptive passenger or, in extreme cases, removal from the flight." Marcus's voice cooled several degrees. "Miss Rodriguez, let me be clear. My daughter was racially profiled and harassed while traveling alone except for her caretaker. The airline's first responsibility is to ensure the safety and dignity of all passengers, especially minors. I expect this situation to be handled with the utmost seriousness." "Of course, Mr. Williams," Janet assured him quickly. "I'm putting a priority flag on this flight in our system right now. Our operations team will monitor it continuously, and the cabin crew will receive special instructions regarding your daughter's well-being." Back on the aircraft, the captain had received word through airline channels that Marcus Williams was now personally involved in the situation. Lisa Morales was a practical woman who understood both the safety implications and the potential corporate consequences of the incident. The Williams family represented not only a high-value customer, but also a significant business partnership, as Williams Innovations provided proprietary software for several of the airline's operations systems. Captain Morales made a decision. Rather than taking off with a volatile situation in the cabin, she would take a moment to assess things personally. She instructed her first officer to continue with the pre-flight checklist while she briefly stepped out of the cockpit. In the first-class cabin, passengers had settled into an uneasy quiet. Zara was attempting to focus on her mathematics textbook, though the periodic glares from Richard made concentration difficult. Miss Jackson maintained a protective presence beside her, her posture alert and her expression watchful. Dr. Johnson had taken out a notebook and appeared to be jotting observations, her academic mind cataloging the social dynamics playing out before her. When Captain Morales appeared in the first-class cabin, her presence commanded immediate attention. In her crisp uniform with 4 stripes on the epaulets, she projected calm authority as she surveyed the scene. She approached Michael Torres, first conferring with him briefly in hushed tones. Then, rather than returning immediately to the cockpit, she made her way to Zara's seat. "Miss Williams," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Morales. I wanted to personally welcome you aboard and make sure you're comfortable for our flight today. Zara, surprised but composed, shook the captain's hand. "Thank you, Captain," she replied. "I'm looking forward to the flight," the captain smiled. "I understand you're heading to a mathematics competition. That's very impressive. I actually used calculus just this morning while calculating our fuel requirements and weight distribution." Zara's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Really? What formulas do you use for that?" Captain Morales spent a moment explaining some of the basic mathematical principles involved in flight planning, clearly delighted by Zara's quick understanding and insightful questions. The interaction was brief, but had several important effects. It signaled to everyone in the cabin that Zara was a passenger of significance who had the captain's personal attention. It demonstrated to Zara herself that she had allies in positions of authority. And it sent a clear message to Richard Whitman, who watched the exchange with thinly veiled displeasure, that his behavior was being noticed at the highest levels. After ensuring Zara was comfortable, Captain Morales returned to the cockpit, stopping briefly at Richard's seat on her way. "Sir," she said politely but firmly, "I want to ensure that all our passengers have a pleasant journey today. My cabin crew has informed me of the earlier seating confusion. Is everything resolved to your satisfaction now?" The question was diplomatically phrased, but left Richard little room to continue his complaints without appearing unreasonable. "The seat is uncomfortable," he muttered, clearly reluctant to voice his real grievances directly to the captain. "I usually prefer a window seat." Captain Morales nodded understandingly. "I appreciate your preference. Unfortunately, seat assignments are finalized during booking, and each passenger is entitled to their assigned seat. I hope you'll still find the first-class experience enjoyable, despite not having your preferred seat type on this occasion." With that, she turned and made her way back to the cockpit, leaving Richard with no opportunity to escalate further without seeming petty. As boarding completed, and the doors were finally closed for departure, the digital spotlight on the incident continued to intensify. Marcus Williams, still in his Manhattan office, had received the preliminary information on Richard Whitman from his security team. The details were illuminating. Richard was Senior Vice President of Business Development at Nextech Solutions, a direct competitor to Williams Innovations in several key markets. More interestingly, Nextech had recently approached Williams Innovations about a potential partnership on a new artificial intelligence platform, talks that were still in the early exploratory stages. The coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely to be just that, a coincidence. Meanwhile, the airline's corporate communications team had become aware of the brewing social media situation. Keywords, including their airline name, racism, first class, and seat stolen, were triggering their monitoring systems. The potential for negative publicity was significant, particularly given the current social climate where corporations were being held to higher standards regarding their handling of racist incidents. Internal messages began flying between the Customer Experience Department, Corporate Communications, and the Executive Suite. The incident that had begun as a simple seating dispute was rapidly evolving into something with much broader implications, a focal point for discussions about race privilege and corporate responsibility. On Flight 623, the safety demonstration was finally underway. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, Zara gazed out her window seat, watching the terminal building slowly recede. Despite the stress of the confrontation, she felt a small thrill of victory. She had stood her ground just as her father had taught her. She had claimed what was rightfully hers. What she didn't yet realize was that the incident was far from over, and that forces beyond the aircraft were already in motion, turning what might have been a forgettable, unpleasant encounter into something that would have lasting consequences for everyone involved. The seatbelt signs had just been illuminated, and Flight 623 was third in line for takeoff when Captain Lisa Morales received the call from airline operations that would change the course of the journey. "Captain, this is operations. We have a situation developing regarding the incident in first class." The voice of the operations manager was carefully neutral, but Captain Morales detected the underlying tension immediately. "What's the situation?" she asked, her hand automatically moving to reduce engine power as she realized they might need to delay takeoff. "Corporate has made a decision," the operations manager explained. Given the social media attention and the high-profile passengers involved, they want the aircraft to return to the gate so security can address the situation properly and document everything according to protocol. Captain Morales frowned. Returning to the gate would mean significant delays, potential crew duty time issues, and inconvenience for over 200 passengers. However, she also understood the corporate concerns. In the current climate, airlines that mishandled incidents with racial components faced severe public backlash and potential legal consequences. Understood, she replied after a brief pause. Please have a gate ready for us. We'll need security and a customer service manager to meet the aircraft. After signing off, Captain Morales exchanged a look with her first officer. Seems this situation in first class has escalated beyond the aircraft, she said already, beginning the process of informing air traffic control about their need to return to the gate. Corporate is getting involved. The first officer nodded grimly. He had seen similar scenarios play out before, though rarely with such high-profile individuals involved. Should I make the announcement, or will you? He asked. I'll handle it, Captain Morales decided. Given the sensitivity of the situation, I think the passengers should hear it directly from me. She picked up the cabin intercom and composed her thoughts carefully before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morales speaking. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we have been instructed to return to the gate temporarily to address an administrative matter. We expect this to be resolved quickly, and will provide more information as soon as it's available. The flight attendants will keep the cabin service available while we're at the gate. Thank you for your patience and understanding. In the first-class cabin, the announcement sent a ripple of reaction through the passengers. Most expressed frustration through sighs or muttered comments about delays, but those who had witnessed the earlier confrontation exchanged knowing glances. Zara remained outwardly calm, though her hand tightened slightly on her mathematics textbook. Miss Jackson leaned over to whisper reassuringly, "It's going to be all right. Your father will have made sure of that." Several rows back, Richard Whitman's expression darkened as he realized the implications of the announcement. His earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced by a growing apprehension. He pulled out his phone the moment the aircraft began taxiing back toward the terminal, typing rapidly despite the seatbelt sign still being illuminated. "Dr." Johnson observed this with quiet interest, noting how quickly his demeanor had shifted from entitled aggression to defensive preparation. As the aircraft approached the gate, Brianna moved through the first-class cabin, stopping briefly at Zara's seat. "Miss Williams," she said quietly, "when we reach the gate, a customer service representative will come aboard to speak with you. Would you like me to arrange for a private area for that conversation?" Zara glanced at Miss Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, please," Zara replied. "Thank you." Brianna then continued to Richard's seat, her professional mask firmly in place despite the earlier tension. "Mr. Whitman, a security officer and customer service representative, will need to speak with you when we reach the gate. I'd appreciate your cooperation to help resolve this matter quickly so all passengers can continue their journey." Richard's response was immediate and defensive. "I haven't done anything wrong," he insisted loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is completely unnecessary and an invasion of my privacy." Brianna maintained her composure. "Sir, this is standard procedure when there's a seating dispute that causes a delay. The conversation will be conducted professionally and discreetly." As the aircraft docked at the gate and the doors were opened, the promised officials boarded promptly. First came 2 airport security officers, their uniforms and badges lending an official gravity to the proceedings. They were followed by a man in a well-tailored suit who introduced himself as Jeffrey Barnes, the airline's regional manager for customer experience. Mr. Barnes approached Zara and Miss Jackson, first introducing himself with a warm smile and professional courtesy. "Miss Williams, Miss Jackson, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience you've experienced today. Would you be willing to step into our first-class lounge briefly so we can document what occurred? It shouldn't take more than a few minutes." Zara nodded, gathering her tablet and backpack with the careful movements of someone trying not to draw additional attention to herself. As they were escorted toward the exit, Richard Whitman was approached by one of the security officers. "Sir, we need to verify your ticket and discuss the earlier seating incident. Please bring your boarding pass and identification." Richard's face flushed with anger, but the presence of uniformed security left him little choice. "This is absurd," he muttered, gathering his belongings. "I'm going to miss my meeting because of this nonsense." The other passengers watched with undisguised interest as both parties were escorted off the aircraft. Captain Morales appeared from the cockpit to address the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize again for this delay. We're working to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. Our current estimate is that we should be ready to depart again in approximately 30 minutes. The flight attendants will continue to provide service while we wait." In the first-class lounge, Zara and Miss Raya Jackson were seated in a private conference room with Mr. Barnes and a customer service representative who introduced herself as Alicia Ramirez. The contrast between this interaction and the earlier confrontation on the aircraft was striking. "Mr." Barnes addressed Zara directly and respectfully, asking her to recount what had happened in her own words. Zara spoke clearly and precisely, describing the events without embellishment, but with an attention to detail that impressed both airline representatives. She explained how she had approached her assigned seat to find it occupied, how Richard had initially dismissed her, and how he had made comments with racial undertones when finally forced to move. Miss Jackson provided additional context, describing the microaggressions they had experienced from the moment they entered the airport. Mr. Barnes listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they had finished, he addressed Zara with genuine remorse. "Miss Williams, on behalf of the airline, I want to offer our sincere apologies. What you experienced is not acceptable and does not reflect our values as a company. We are committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for all our passengers, and we clearly failed to do that today." Zara acknowledged his apology with a maturity beyond her years. "Thank you, Mr. Barnes. I understand that Mr. Whitman's behavior was not the airline's fault." Mr. Barnes smiled slightly at her composure. "Nevertheless, we could have handled the situation better. I want to assure you that we're taking this very seriously. We're currently reviewing the incident with Mr. Whitman, and appropriate action will be taken." Meanwhile, in another room, Richard Whitman was facing a much less pleasant conversation. Security had verified all tickets and confirmed what was already known. Seat 3 Amperes had been rightfully assigned to Zara Williams, while Richard's assigned seat was 7C. The security officers had taken statements from multiple witnesses, including flight attendants and nearby passengers, all confirming that Richard had refused to move and had made inappropriate comments. Jeffrey Barnes joined this meeting after concluding his conversation with Zara, his expression considerably less sympathetic than it had been with the young girl. "Mr. Tudazalf." Jeffrey Barnes joined this meeting after concluding his conversation with Zara. "Whitman," he began, "we have a clear picture of what occurred on the aircraft. Multiple witnesses have confirmed that you refused to vacate a seat that was not assigned to you and made comments that could be interpreted as racially motivated." Richard attempted to interrupt, but Barnes held up a hand to stop him. "The airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. At this point, you have two options. You can take your assigned seat and continue on this flight with the understanding that any further incidents will result in immediate removal, or you can be rebooked on a later flight at no additional charge." The ultimatum was delivered politely but firmly, leaving Richard with little room to maneuver. His face reddened further, a vein visibly pulsing in his temple. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "I'm being treated like a criminal because of a simple misunderstanding about seating." One of the security officers spoke up. "Sir, refusing to comply with crew member instructions regarding seating is a violation of federal aviation regulations. We're handling this administratively rather than pursuing formal charges, which is the more lenient approach." Richard seemed to realize the seriousness of his position for the first time. The bluster gradually drained from his posture, replaced by a calculating assessment of his limited options. "Fine," he finally said. "I'll take my assigned seat and continue on the flight. This was all just a misunderstanding anyway. Barnes nodded, clearly unconvinced by the misunderstanding claim, but satisfied with the resolution. "We'll be informing the cabin crew of this decision. I must emphasize that any further incidents will result in your immediate removal from the flight and potential placement on our restricted passenger list." As they prepared to return to the aircraft, Richard approached Zara and Miss Amen in the Risays, McCorded and Jackson, who were being escorted back by Alicia Ramirez. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes that contradicted his conciliatory words. "I apologize for the confusion earlier," he said, his voice just a bit too loud, clearly meant for the airline representatives to hear. "No hard feelings, I hope." Before Zara could respond, he leaned slightly closer and added in a much lower tone, intended only for her ears, "Your daddy won't always be around to fight your battles, little girl." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes. Miss Jackson stepped protectively closer to Zara, having caught enough of the whispered comment to recognize its threatening nature. She opened her mouth to report it, but Zara touched her arm gently, shaking her head slightly. This was not the time or place to escalate further. They would deal with Richard Whitman's threats in their own way. What do you think about how this situation was handled? Comment number 1. If you believe the airline did the right thing by returning to the gate, or number 2, if you think they should have handled it differently. Like this video, if you're impressed by Zara's incredible composure throughout this ordeal, subscribe to find out what happens next, as this confrontation takes an unexpected turn. Why would Richard Whitman risk his reputation and career over an airplane seat? Could there be more to this story than a simple case of entitlement and racism? Let's continue and find out the shocking truth behind this. Confrontation. As Flight 623 finally accelerated down the runway and lifted into the afternoon sky, a tense calm had settled over the first-class cabin. Zara gazed out her window, watching the landscape of New York diminish beneath her, while beside her Miss Jackson maintained a vigilant awareness of their surroundings. The confrontation had been nominally resolved, but the atmosphere remained charged with unspoken tension. Richard Whitman had returned to his assigned seat in 7C, with poor grace, his body language radiating frustration and barely contained anger. The other passengers in first class alternated between stealing curious glances at the key players in the drama and pretending to be absorbed in their books, devices, or the in-flight entertainment. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt signs were turned off, the cabin crew began their service routine with deliberate normalcy, as if by maintaining the rituals of first-class travel they could dispel the lingering discomfort. Michael Torres personally served Zara and Miss Jackson, ensuring they received their beverages first and inquiring discreetly if there was anything special they needed. "Miss Williams," he said, with genuine warmth, "we have some extra dessert options set aside if you'd like something sweet later in the flight." Zara thanked him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kindness was appreciated, but it couldn't completely erase the strain of the earlier confrontation or the whispered threat that still echoed in her mind. As Michael moved on to serve other passengers, Zara's tablet chimed softly with an incoming message. It was from her father, checking in on her status. "Everything okay now? Are you airborne?" the message read. Zara typed a quick response, bringing her father up to date on the resolution at the gate and their current situation. She hesitated briefly before adding, "Mr. Whitman made a comment as we were returning to the plane. Said you won't always be around to fight my battles." Miss Jackson heard it too. Marcus Williams's response was immediate and reassuring. "You're handling this with incredible grace and dignity. I'm very proud of you. Continue as you are and don't engage with him further. Focus on your competition. We'll address his behavior through the proper channels." What Zara didn't know was that those proper channels were already in motion. In his Manhattan office, Marcus had assembled a formidable team, his head of security, 2 senior corporate attorneys, and his chief of communications. The information they had gathered on Richard Whitman painted an increasingly suspicious picture. Nextech Solutions has been trying to acquire our neural network algorithm for months, reported Sharon Chen Williams, Innovation's chief legal officer. We've consistently refused to license it or include it in any partnership discussions. David Carter, the head of security, added his findings. Whitman has been leading those acquisition efforts. More interestingly, he's on record making disparaging comments about diversity initiatives in tech during an industry panel last year. Called them, and I quote, lowering the bar to check boxes. Marcus absorbed this information with the focused calm that characterized his leadership style. So we have a senior executive from a competitor who has previously expressed racist views coincidentally on the same flight as my daughter, taking her specific seat and creating a confrontation. This doesn't sound like random chance. It gets more interesting, David continued. Our monitoring of his communications since the incident began shows he's been sending multiple messages to Nextech's CEO and their legal department. The content is encrypted, but the pattern suggests damage control, not the casual updates you'd send if this were truly an innocent misunderstanding. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Keep monitoring. And prepare a detailed brief for our legal team on potential corporate espionage and harassment charges. Back on the aircraft, Zara had settled into reading her mathematics textbook, finding comfort in the elegant certainty of equations and proofs. Numbers didn't lie or threaten or try to make you feel less than you were. They simply existed in perfect logical relationships that could be understood and relied upon. Miss Jackson had her own book open, but was reading very little. Her attention divided between Zara and occasional scans of the cabin, particularly the area around Richard's seat. Approximately 2 hours into the flight, Dr. Maya Johnson made her way back from the lavatory and paused briefly beside their row. I wonder if I might have a word with you, Miss Jackson, she asked quietly. I have some information that might be relevant to your situation, Miss. Jackson glanced at Zara, who nodded her understanding before rising to follow Dr. Johnson to the small galley area where they could speak privately. I don't mean to intrude, Doctor. Johnson began once they were relatively alone, but I recognized Mr. Whitman from a technology conference last year where I was a keynote speaker on diversity in STEM fields. He works for Nextech Solutions, which I believe is a competitor to Williams Innovations. Miss Jackson's expression sharpened with interest. You're certain of this? Dr. Johnson nodded firmly. Absolutely. He asked a rather confrontational question after my presentation, challenging the need for diversity initiatives in hiring. It was memorable because it was so at odds with the general tone of the conference. This new information cast the earlier confrontation in an entirely different light. What had seemed like random entitlement and racism now appeared potentially calculated and deliberate. Miss Jackson thanked Dr. Johnson for the information and returned to her seat, leaning over to whisper the revelation to Zara. Zara's eyes widened slightly, her quick mind immediately connecting the dots. Do you think he knew who I was before he took my seat? She asked softly. It seems increasingly likely, Miss Jackson replied. The question is, why? What would he gain from creating a scene with you specifically? Before they could discuss it further, their conversation was interrupted by raised voices several rows back. Richard Whitman was engaged in a heated exchange with another passenger, his voice carrying clearly despite his obvious attempt to keep it down. The standards are clearly dropping, he was saying. Merit doesn't matter anymore, just checking diversity boxes. It's reverse discrimination, plain and simple. The other passenger, a middle-aged white man who had been quietly reading before Richard initiated the conversation, looked distinctly uncomfortable. I don't think that's a fair characterization, he responded, his tone suggesting he wished to be left out of the discussion altogether. Richard was not to be deterred. Look at that girl up there, he continued, not quite pointing but nodding in Zara's direction. Daughter of Marcus Williams. Got everything handed to her because of who her father is and what they look like. Meanwhile, people who've worked their whole lives for success get pushed aside. The racial component of his commentary was thinly veiled at best. Michael Torres, who had been monitoring the situation carefully throughout the flight, approached Richard's seat with a warning expression. Sir, I need to ask you to keep your voice down. Other passengers have complained about the disruption. Richard's face flushed with anger. So, I'm not even allowed to have a private conversation now. This is ridiculous. Michael remained professionally calm. You're welcome to converse quietly with other passengers who wish to engage, but making loud comments about other passengers, particularly a minor, is not appropriate. The exchange drew the attention of most of the first-class cabin, including Zara, who kept her eyes fixed on her book, despite being acutely aware of being the subject of discussion. Miss Pott. Jackson placed a protective hand on her shoulder, a silent reminder of her support and presence. As Michael continued his conversation with Richard Dr. Johnson moved discreetly to the seat beside Zara, the adjacent passenger, having gone to use the lavatory. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said quietly. "Are you all right?" Zara nodded, her expression composed, despite the strain evident in her eyes. "I'm used to people making assumptions about me," she replied. "Dad says it's because they can't imagine achieving what we have through our own merit, so they invent excuses." Dr. Johnson smiled approvingly. "Your father sounds like a wise man. If it helps, I've followed his career and contributions to STEM education for years. His success is well earned, as I'm sure yours will be too." Their conversation was interrupted by movement near Richard's seat. He had stood up ostensibly to retrieve something from the overhead bin, but the maneuver positioned him in the aisle with a clear line of sight to Zara. His expression as he looked in her direction contained none of the forced politeness he had displayed at the gate. Instead, it revealed naked contempt and something darker, almost calculating. A moment later, he returned to his seat, but not before deliberately brushing against another passenger's arm, causing them to spill their drink. The minor commotion served as a distraction, but Zara had seen enough in that brief, unguarded moment to understand something fundamental. Richard Whitman's actions toward her were not random. They were targeted and deliberate. As the flight continued, Zara noticed Richard making his way to the lavatory located at the front of the cabin. On his return journey, he paused briefly beside her row, pretending to steady himself during a moment of light turbulence. "Your father's neural network algorithm," he said under his breath, barely moving his lips. "That's what this is really about. Nextech knows what you're carrying." Before Zara could process this cryptic statement, Richard had moved on, returning to his seat as if nothing had happened. Zara turned to Miss Jackson with wide eyes, her voice a barely audible whisper. "I think this is about Dad's work, not just about me or the seat. Mr. Whitman just said something about Dad's neural network algorithm." Miss Jackson's expression grew grave. Marcus Williams's revolutionary neural network algorithm was one of Williams' innovation's most closely guarded assets, a breakthrough in artificial intelligence that competitors had been trying to replicate without success for years. If Richard's interest was indeed focused on corporate espionage rather than merely racial harassment, the stakes were significantly higher than they had initially appeared. Zara quickly typed another message to her father, relaying Richard's cryptic comment and their growing suspicion that this was about more than just a disputed airplane seat. Marcus's response confirmed their fears. "That algorithm is exactly what Nextech has been trying to acquire. Stay alert, but don't engage. I'm contacting our security team and the FBI's Corporate Espionage Division. This is no longer just about inappropriate behavior on a flight." As the realization dawned that they were caught in the middle of what appeared to be an attempted corporate espionage operation, Zara felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. The mathematics competition that had seemed so important just hours ago now felt secondary to this unexpected development. Yet even as the stakes escalated, she found herself drawing on the lessons her father had taught her about remaining calm under pressure and thinking strategically rather than reacting emotionally. One thing was becoming increasingly clear: Richard Whitman's actions had been deliberate from the start. The confrontation over the airplane seat had been merely the opening move in a much larger and more dangerous game, one with implications that extended far beyond the confines of Flight 623. High above the American heartland, as Flight 623 continued its journey westward, Zara Williams processed the startling revelation that her unpleasant encounter with Richard Whitman might be connected to corporate espionage. The mathematics prodigy had encountered bullies before, had faced discrimination and microaggressions, but never anything of this magnitude or complexity. Yet rather than being overwhelmed, Zara found her analytical mind engaging with the problem as she would a challenging equation, breaking it down into components that could be understood and addressed. Her first step was to gather more information. Turning to Miss Jackson, she whispered, "What could Mr. Whitman have meant about me carrying something? I don't have any information about Dad's neural network algorithm." Miss Jackson considered this carefully. "Perhaps he believes you have access to it through your devices," she suggested, nodding toward Zara's tablet. "Or maybe he thinks your father entrusted you with some component of it for safekeeping." This idea seemed plausible. Marcus Williams was known for his unconventional approach to security, sometimes hiding his most valuable digital assets in plain sight, using encryption methods that only he and a select few could decipher. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility that he might have entrusted something to Zara, perhaps, without explicitly telling her its true nature. Zara's tablet chimed with another message from her father. "Security team is working with airline to monitor the situation remotely. Corporate legal has contacted FBI. Continue normal activities, but keep devices secure. Do not let tablet out of your sight. I'm on my way to SFO now." The message confirmed that Marcus was taking the situation extremely seriously enough to fly across the country to meet Zara upon arrival, rather than simply arranging additional security. Meanwhile, 6 rows back, Richard Whitman was engaged in his own strategic calculations. His initial plan had gone awry from the moment Zara had refused to yield her seat. He had counted on the societal conditioning that often led people, particularly women and minorities, to avoid confrontation in public spaces. The fact that a 10-year-old girl had stood her ground so firmly had thrown off his entire approach. Now, with airline staff watching him closely and his target alerted to his potential motives, he needed to adapt quickly. Richard discreetly checked his phone, which had been set to airplane mode but still allowed him to view previously downloaded messages. The latest communication from his CEO was clear: abort if compromised. Primary objective remains the algorithm. Williams' arrival at SFO confirmed for 1700 hours. Team will intercept there if necessary. Richard's jaw tightened. The implication was clear: he was being set up as the fall guy if things went wrong, while Nextech would still pursue the algorithm through other means. His professional reputation was already damaged by the public confrontation which had been recorded and shared on social media. If he failed to deliver, his career at Nextech would almost certainly be over. Throughout the first-class cabin, other passengers had settled into uneasy routines, the earlier drama seemingly resolved but not forgotten. Dr. Maya Johnson continued her discreet observation of the dynamics at play, occasionally making notes in her journal. Her academic focus on racial dynamics in public spaces had never yielded such a rich case study, though her primary concern remained Zara's well-being rather than her research. Midway through the flight, as meal service was being completed, Captain Morales's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morales. We're currently flying over Colorado and expect to arrive in San Francisco approximately 15 minutes ahead of schedule, thanks to favorable tailwinds. The weather in San Francisco is clear, with temperatures around 72 degrees. We'll be beginning our initial descent in about 90 minutes." The routine announcement provided a welcome sense of normalcy, a reminder that despite the drama unfolding in first class, this was still just a commercial flight proceeding according to plan. For Zara, the announcement prompted a practical concern. She would need to use the lavatory before the descent began, but that would mean leaving her tablet unattended or taking it with her to a small confined space where it might be damaged or dropped. After brief consideration, she decided on the latter option, not willing to risk leaving the device even in Miss Jackson's trusted care, given her father's explicit warning. As Zara stood, tablet clutched securely to her chest, Richard Whitman also rose from his seat, timing his movement to coincide with hers. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. "Miss, I have replies." Jackson immediately recognized the potential threat. "I'll accompany you," she said to Zara, rising as well. Michael Torres, who had been monitoring the situation, continuously stepped into the aisle, strategically positioning himself between Richard and Zara's path to the lavatory. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" he asked Richard, his tone polite, but his posture unmistakably blocking. Richard feigned surprise. "Just stretching my legs," he said, though his eyes remained fixed on Zara and the tablet she carried. "Long flight, you know how it is." Michael nodded, not moving from his position. "Of course. Perhaps you'd like to walk toward the rear of the first-class cabin. It's less congested in that direction at the moment." The suggestion was phrased as helpful advice, but delivered with the authority of a directive. Richard hesitated, then nodded stiffly, and turned toward the back of the first-class section, effectively thwarted in whatever he had been planning. Zara and Miss Jackson proceeded to the forward lavatory with Miss Jackson waiting outside while Zara went in tablet, still clutched protectively. When they returned to their seats, Zara found a message waiting from her father. "Nextech CEO Thomas Reynolds has called an emergency board meeting. Our sources say Richard is being disavowed. They're claiming he acted alone without company authorization. Stay vigilant. Landing in SFO in 90 minutes. This development added another layer to the already complex situation. If Nextech was publicly distancing itself from Richard's actions, his position became even more precarious. A desperate adversary was potentially more dangerous than a calculated one. "Mistake?" Jackson read the message over Zara's shoulder and frowned slightly. "They're cutting him loose," she murmured, "making him the scapegoat." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Which means he has nothing to lose now," she concluded, displaying an understanding of human motivation that went well beyond her years. As if to confirm their assessment, Richard had begun typing furiously on his phone, his expression growing increasingly agitated as he presumably received updates about his rapidly deteriorating professional situation. Dr. Time. Johnson, who had been observing from her seat, moved forward again during a moment when the aisle was clear. "I couldn't help noticing the tension," she said quietly to Miss Jackson. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Miss Jackson considered the offer. Having an additional ally, particularly one with Dr. Johnson's credentials and authority, could prove valuable. "Yes," she decided. "If you could perhaps sit with Zara for a moment while I speak with the flight attendant, I'm concerned about our arrival arrangements." "Doctor." Johnson nodded understandingly and took the temporarily vacant seat beside Zara, while Miss Jackson moved toward the galley, where Michael was preparing for the pre-landing service. As soon as they were relatively private, Miss Jackson explained the situation in hushed tones. "We have reason to believe Mr. Whitman may be involved in corporate espionage targeting Williams Innovations. Mr. Williams is concerned enough that he's flying to San Francisco to meet us. I'm worried about what might happen during deplaning and in the terminal." Michael processed this information quickly, his professionalism never wavering. "I'll inform the captain immediately," he said. "We can arrange for security to meet the aircraft and escort you through the terminal if needed." While this conversation was taking place, Dr. Johnson was providing Zara with a different kind of support. "You know," she said conversationally, "I've been studying situations like this for most of my career, and I've rarely seen someone your age handle such pressure with such composure." Zara smiled, slightly appreciating the genuine compliment. "My dad says that staying calm isn't about not feeling the pressure, it's about not letting the pressure control your actions." "Doctor," Johnson nodded approvingly. "That's remarkably wise, and very applicable to what you're experiencing now. This incident has transformed from what appeared to be simple racial discrimination into something more complex, with elements of corporate conflict intertwined with the racial dynamics." Her academic analysis provided Zara with a framework for understanding the situation that went beyond her personal experience of it, a perspective that was both validating and enlightening. "Do you think Mr. Bacter and Mr. Brackett Whitman would have behaved the same way if I were white?" Zara asked, genuinely curious about the sociologist's professional opinion. Dr. Johnson considered this carefully. "That's an excellent question. In my research, I've found that when racial bias and other motivations intersect, the bias often serves as an enabler or amplifier. Mr. Whitman might have still attempted to achieve his corporate objectives, but the specific tactics, the willingness to publicly confront and attempt to intimidate a child, those were likely influenced by racial assumptions about who could be pushed around with impunity. This analysis resonated with Zara's own intuitions about the situation. Before they could explore the topic further, Miss Jackson returned, and Dr. Johnson graciously relinquished the seat. "Thank you for your insights," Zara said sincerely, as Dr. Johnson prepared to return to her own seat. "They've helped more than you know." As the flight entered its final hour, preparations for landing began in earnest. The mood in the first-class cabin had shifted again, a subtle tension returning as passengers instinctively sensed that the drama might not be fully resolved. Richard had fallen into a brooding silence, his earlier agitation replaced by a focused stillness that was somehow more concerning than his previous overt hostility. Captain Morales made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into the San Francisco area. We're currently about 45 minutes from landing. The cabin crew will be coming through to collect any remaining service items and prepare the cabin for arrival." What the announcement didn't mention, but what Michael had quietly informed Zara and Miss Jackson, was that arrangements had been made for security personnel to meet the aircraft at the gate. Additionally, Marcus Williams had coordinated with airline officials to arrange for Zara and Miss Jackson to be first off the plane before other first-class passengers to minimize any potential for further confrontation. As the aircraft descended through the cloud layer over the Bay Area, Zara gazed out her window at the iconic landscape below. The Golden Gate Bridge was visible in the distance, and the city's distinctive hills created a familiar silhouette against the afternoon sky. Under normal circumstances, she would have been buzzing with excitement about the mathematics competition, mentally reviewing theorems and practicing calculations. Instead, she found herself engaged in a very different kind of strategic thinking, preparing for whatever might await them when the aircraft doors opened at the gate. Miss Jackson squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Your father will be waiting," she reminded Zara, "and he's never let anything harm you yet." Zara nodded, drawing strength from the knowledge that despite the unexpected complications of what should have been a routine flight, she was not alone in facing them. As the wheels touched down on the runway at San Francisco International Airport, the confrontation that had begun over a disputed airplane seat had evolved into something far more significant, with implications that extended well beyond this single flight, or even this single day. What awaited them at the gate would be the final act in a drama that had unexpectedly thrust a 10-year-old mathematics prodigy into the center of a corporate espionage attempt interwoven with the racial dynamics that had shaped her young life from the beginning. The moment Flight 623 docked at Gate 34 in San Francisco International Airport's Terminal 3, a carefully orchestrated sequence of events began to unfold. Before the seatbelt sign had even been turned off, Michael Torres approached Zara and Miss Jackson. "Captain Morales has authorized priority deplaning for you," he said quietly. "If you'll gather your belongings, we'll escort you off first." Richard Whitman observed this from his seat in 7C, his expression darkening as he realized that his target was about to slip away. He began to rise, but found his path immediately blocked by one of the other flight attendants, who smiled pleasantly while firmly requesting that he remain seated until the captain turned off the seatbelt sign. Outside on the jet bridge, a small contingent waited two airport security officers, a representative from the airline's customer service department, and most significantly Marcus Williams himself. Despite having just completed a cross-country flight on his private jet, Marcus looked impeccable in a perfectly tailored suit, his commanding presence unmistakable even from a distance. When the aircraft door opened, Zara exited, first followed closely by Miss Jackson. The moment Zara spotted her father, she broke protocol and ran to him, tablet still clutched protectively to her chest. Marcus enveloped his daughter in a tight embrace, his usual public reserve momentarily forgotten in the relief of seeing her safe. "You handled everything perfectly," he murmured to her, pride evident in his voice. "I'm so proud of you." As they separated, Marcus nodded gratefully to Miss Jackson, who had been Zara's steadfast protector throughout the ordeal. Then his expression shifted, the warmth replaced by the focused intensity that had made him a formidable business leader. "Let's move to a secure area," he said, glancing toward the aircraft door, where other passengers would soon begin deplaning. "We have matters to discuss before we deal with the press." Zara's eyes widened slightly. The press, Marcus nodded grimly. The incident has gone viral. There are reporters waiting in the main terminal. Our communications team is managing it, but we'll need to make a statement. The small group moved swiftly through the empty jet bridge and into a private lounge that had been arranged for their use. Inside, they found additional members of Marcus's team, Sharon Chen, the chief legal officer for Williams Innovations, David Carter, head of security, and Emma Richards, the company's chief communications officer. As they settled into the comfortable seating area, Marcus turned to Zara. "First, I need to know that you're really okay," he said, his voice softening. "Everything else can wait if you need time." Zara straightened her shoulders, her composure remarkable for someone so young who had just been through such an ordeal. "I'm okay, Dad," she assured him. "I want to understand what's happening." Marcus nodded, respecting her resilience and right to be informed. "Richard Whitman was apparently attempting to gain access to our new neural network algorithm," he explained. "We have reason to believe Nextech sent him specifically because they knew you would be on the flight." "But how would I have access to the algorithm?" Zara asked, confused. "And how did they know I'd be traveling?" Marcus exchanged glances with David Carter, who took over the explanation. "We believe there was a security breach in our scheduling system. Someone accessed the information about your flight reservations. As for the algorithm, they may have believed you were carrying a physical backup or that your tablet contained access codes." Sharon Chen added further context. "Nextech has been trying to acquire our neural network technology for months. They recently approached us about a potential partnership that would have given them access, but we declined. This appears to have been their alternative approach." Before they could discuss further, there was a commotion outside the lounge. Through the glass door they could see Richard Whitman being escorted by airport security, his face flushed with anger as he argued with the officers. One of Marcus's security team stepped outside briefly, then returned with an update. "Whitman is being detained for questioning by airport police and FBI agents regarding potential corporate espionage. They found specialized scanning equipment in his carry-on that could have been used to hack electronic devices." Marcus received this information with a grim nod. "Ensure our legal team cooperates fully with the investigation," he instructed Sharon. "We want this handled by the book." Turning back to Zara, he added, "Your mathematics competition starts tomorrow. Do you still want to participate, or would you prefer to return home?" Zara considered this briefly. "I want to compete," she decided. "I've been preparing for months. I won't let Mr. Whitman take that away from me, too." Marcus smiled proudly at his daughter's determination. "Then compete you shall. We'll arrange appropriate security, but it will be discreet. I don't want this incident to overshadow your accomplishment." As they finalized their plans, Emma Richards approached with her tablet. "Mr. Williams, we need to address the media. The story has exploded online. There are already calls for boycotts of Nextech products, and the airline is facing questions about their handling of racial incidents." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Prepare a statement emphasizing that this was both a racial incident and an attempted corporate espionage. I want to be clear that we're pursuing all legal avenues, but I don't want to overshadow the broader issue of how racial bias enables and amplifies other forms of misconduct." Emma made notes rapidly. "And regarding Zara, there's significant public support for her, with many praising her composure and courage." "No direct statements from or about Zara," Marcus said firmly. "She's a minor and deserves privacy. Simply state that my daughter handled a difficult situation with dignity and we're proud of her." Zara listened to this exchange, with interest, recognizing how her father was strategically managing the narrative while protecting her. It was another lesson in leadership added to the many he had already taught her. The following morning, as Zara prepared for her mathematics competition, the fallout from the incident continued to unfold across multiple fronts. Nextech Solutions issued a public statement disavowing Richard Whitman's actions, claiming he had acted without company authorization and had been terminated effective immediately. Few believed this convenient distancing, especially after investigative journalists uncovered emails suggesting Nextech executives had been aware of the plan. The airline held a press conference announcing comprehensive new anti-discrimination training for all staff and the implementation of a zero-tolerance policy for racial harassment on their flights. Brianna Cooper, the flight attendant who had initially sided with Richard during the seat dispute, issued a personal apology to Zara and committed to additional training in recognizing and addressing racial bias. Captain Lisa Morales was commended by airline management for her decisive handling of the situation, particularly her decision to return to the gate rather than allow the confrontation to potentially escalate during the flight. Richard Whitman himself faced the most severe consequences. In addition to losing his executive position at Nextech, he now faced federal charges related to attempted corporate espionage and possession of illegal hacking equipment on an aircraft. His bail had been set at $500,000, and he was required to surrender his passport. The evidence against him was mounting, as investigators discovered communications linking him directly to Nextech's senior leadership, contradicting the company's claims that he had acted alone. Amidst this corporate and legal drama, Zara Williams stood on a stage at the National Youth Mathematics Challenge, solving complex equations that would have challenged most college professors. With clear focus and remarkable skill, she worked through each problem methodically, her earlier ordeals seemingly forgotten as she immersed herself in the elegant certainty of mathematics. When the results were announced that evening, Zara had secured first place, her perfect score, setting a new record for the competition. The victory was covered by local media, though most reporters respectfully maintained distance due to Marcus Williams's explicit requests regarding his daughter's privacy. 3 months after the incident, long after the immediate media attention had faded, Marcus Williams called a press conference to make a significant announcement. With Zara standing proudly at his side, he revealed that Williams Innovations was establishing the Equality in Transportation Initiative, a foundation dedicated to fighting discrimination in all forms of public transportation. "What my daughter experienced is not unique," Marcus explained to the assembled reporters. "Many people face similar discrimination daily, without the resources or platform to address it. This foundation will provide legal support, advocate for policy changes, and fund education programs aimed at creating truly equitable transportation experiences for everyone." The foundation would be funded initially with $50 million from Williams Innovations, with additional support from other tech companies and transportation providers who had been motivated to examine their own practices following innovations, the publicity surrounding Zara's experience. In a surprising twist of corporate fate, 6 months after the incident, Williams Innovations completed an acquisition of Nextech Solutions, which had been severely weakened by the scandal and subsequent investigations. The acquisition, valued at $3.2 billion, was significantly below Nextech's previous market valuation, representing what financial analysts described as the corporate consequence of ethical failure. When asked by a reporter whether the acquisition was a form of revenge, Marcus smiled slightly. "It's simply good business," he replied. "Their technical assets complement our portfolio, and we believe that under proper ethical leadership, their remaining employees can contribute significantly to our shared future." As for Richard Whitman, he eventually accepted a plea deal admitting to corporate espionage charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months in federal prison. His career in the technology sector was effectively over his name, now synonymous with both racial entitlement and corporate malfeasance. 1 year to the day after the incident on Flight 623, Zara Williams, now 11 years old and even more accomplished in her mathematical pursuits, sat in her father's office overlooking Central Park. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked, referring to Richard Whitman without needing to specify. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not about him specifically," he answered honestly, "but about what he represents, yes. The intersection of racial bias and corporate ethics remains a challenge we must continue to address." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "My seat was my right," she said, echoing the words her father had taught her before that fateful flight. "But it became about so much more than just a seat." "That's often how change happens," Marcus replied. SMALL stands for basic rights that ripple outward to create larger transformation. As they looked out at the city skyline together, father and daughter reflected on how a simple assertion of one's right to an assigned airplane seat had catalyzed significant changes in airline policies, in corporate accountability, in public discourse about race and privilege, and in their own lives. What had begun as an uncomfortable confrontation had ultimately served justice in ways that extended far beyond one flight or one family, creating ripples that would continue to influence corporate behavior and transportation equity for years to come. What did you think about this story of courage, discrimination, and ultimately justice? Comment below with your own experiences standing up against unfairness or discrimination. If you were moved by Zara's composure and courage, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming adversity. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for their rights can create positive change beyond their immediate situation. Thank you for watching this journey of a young girl who refused to give up what was rightfully hers and in the process changed much more than just her seat assignment. This story teaches us powerful lessons about dignity, courage, and justice in the face of discrimination. First, we learn that standing up for our rights, even in seemingly small matters like an airplane seat, can have far-reaching impacts beyond our immediate situation. Zara's refusal to surrender what was rightfully hers triggered changes in corporate policies and public consciousness. Second, we see how discrimination often intersects with other forms of misconduct. Richard's racist behavior wasn't isolated. It enabled and masked his corporate espionage attempt. This reminds us that addressing racism isn't just about individual incidents, but about dismantling systems that allow such behavior to thrive. Third, preparation matters. Marcus taught Zara to expect and handle discrimination, giving her tools to respond with dignity rather than being caught off guard. This preparation empowered her to maintain composure under pressure. Fourth, allies are essential. From Dr. Johnson's support to Michael's intervention, Zara succeeded partly because others recognized injustice and acted. True change requires both individual courage and collective action. Finally, the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just personal victory, but creating systemic change. The Williams family transformed their experience into a foundation that helps others, demonstrating how personal adversity can fuel broader social progress. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in public spaces? How did you respond? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire others facing similar situations. If Zara's courage resonated with you, please hit the like button to help this important message reach more people who need to hear it. Has someone ever tried to make you feel like you didn't belong somewhere? You had every right to be. How did you handle it? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about standing up against injustice and finding your voice in difficult situations. Do you know someone struggling with discrimination or feeling powerless against unfair treatment? Share this video with them as a reminder that standing firm for your rights can create positive change beyond your immediate circumstances. Thank you for joining us on this journey of courage, dignity, and justice. Remember, your seat is your right, and sometimes claiming that seat can change the world around you.